You're listening to Big Blend Radio's English Connection Show with Glynn Burrows, owner of Norfolk Tours. Hey, everybody. So today we are going to talk about historic libraries of England. And this is now the third time we've tried to record this, right, Glynn? Because we've both misbehaved
We are.
immediately.
Yeah.
Something happens when you go in a library and they tell you to shh.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult place for me to be, but I do love libraries, and the more historic, the better. You could just, as a kid, it's how I went around the world, even though I traveled a lot, as you know, but that's how I went around the world and, got an addiction to historic fiction. And that's
Yeah.
what taught me history and got me excited. So,
Yeah.
is that the same for you too?
I was brought up with history, so I did used to enjoy reading different history stories, but I was just surrounded by it. So I mean, it was a lot simpler for me to just soak it all up. But yeah, I
Mm,
do love reading some of those historic novels. I did when I was a teenager. I read quite a lot of the historic novels, and
mm,
they just transport you to another place. And
mm,
the best thing about a novel is that it's in here. So although
mhm,
you're reading a book and you're being told what there is around you, it's still in here. It's not
mm,
actually made by the writer. It's created in here through the writer. So,
mhm.
you're in whatever place you want to be. So,
It's
and
fun.
that's one of the best things about reading is you can actually transpose yourself into another place at another time. It's
It's
love.
co-creative. Whenever we do author interviews, I'm always telling them like we're part of the creativity of the book as
Yeah.
a reader
Yeah,
because
you are.
you're
Definitely.
making your own movie in your head out of what they've written,
Yeah.
and it's precious. I wanted to ask you about this with England and the historic libraries. Because back in the day, right, when with the castles and everything, I just learned, by the way, about the world of the cabinets of curiosities from
Oh,
Victoria
yes.
Chick. Yes, she just did the his. She is doing a three-part series on the
Right.
history of art museums, and then she got down the rabbit hole because it was supposed to be one interview. Now we're doing three because she went around the world, see some of the
Yes.
very first museums, and England was in there. And
Yes.
the Oxford, she was saying Oxford is one of the top places, one of the most historic libraries. But
The
I mean,
university, the
yeah.
university, whatever university you go to, they've got museums because that was the only way that people could study because they had
Mm,
to have things in cabinets. And that's where you get the cabinet of curiosities because people would travel the world and bring back things and put them in cabinets and in drawers and in cupboards and things. And then if someone came along and said, "Oh, I'm interested in fossils," then there would be a drawer with fossils in. Or if you had, somebody interested in old books, then someone would have a cabinet with old books in. And that is
yeah.
how museums actually started, just by
Yeah.
collections of bits and pieces. And that's the same as libraries, really.
That's what I thought. I was thinking
Yeah.
this kind of goes hand in hand with the
Yeah.
libraries being so libraries have also got exhibits at times. Today, we have a lot of libraries are where artists can have, book signings are done,
Yes.
seminars are given, workshops. It's a
Definitely.
public space. We
Yes.
have to fight to keep our libraries open. I don't know if you have that fight in
Yes.
England.
Yes. Some of
Oh
them are
dear.
closing, but not the stately home libraries are obviously are protected through being part of a stately home. But a lot of our public libraries are struggling because they're
Mm,
paid for by the public purse. And obviously, money is not as easily come by as it used to be. So, for
mm,
instance, in Norfolk, I go to the Norfolk Record Office, which is where all of our old documents are. And actually, that's only open 3 days a week now, I believe. Whereas when I first started, it was open 5.5 days a week. So,
mm,
there are problems in our
mm.
library service because money.
Yeah,
So,
all around the world. And then I have a friend, Tiffany. I think you've been on a show with her. She's a owns a bed and breakfast in just outside Hot Springs, Arkansas, and it's a little
mhm.
tiny town called Bismarck. It was a former mining town. In fact, the mine is on their bed and breakfast property. and she's working to create a library. And
Yeah.
so, I think this, but, I think as travelers, going to some of these historic libraries is on our list as travelers for those who are history lovers, love
Yeah.
books. But in your article, and everyone, that's linked in the episode notes, or go to blendradioandtv.com, just type in libraries and you'll find Glynn. We've got libraries for certain things. So some art museums, like the one that Victoria is working on for New Mexico,
Hmm.
their first thing they do is like, we have a library. And
Yes.
they've got donations of all these art books and
Yep.
all kinds of things.
Yep.
So libraries are not just for like everything. They're specific ones, right? Themed ones.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, I mean, for instance, there is a library that goes with the group that celebrates fairs and circuses. So there is a library that has got books all about fairs and circuses. Then you've got another one, which is the Royal Horticultural Society Library, which has got books all about plants and
Mm,
gardening and things like that. So you've got specific books about specific subjects, because as well as I do, if you were collecting all books like there is in the British Library, for instance, you've got millions. So if you're just interested in one subject, then the best thing to do is to go to the library connected to that one
mm,
subject. And there are libraries for every subject you could imagine. If you just,
mm,
put them into a search engine, a library about whatever, there'll be a library about it,
mm.
because people collect books about certain subjects.
Now I know the Royals, they have libraries too, right? But that's not necessarily open to the public, right?
No, no. The royal collections are something which are just out of this world, because if you can imagine, they've been in the family for generations, dozens of generations, and they've been handed down. And a lot of the things that royal members of the royal family get given to them or
Mm-hmm.
they inherit are things that are totally unique,
Mm,
and very often when a royal is visiting some country, they will be given one of the major things to do with that country. So, the royal family have got archives that really are worldwide, of, world interest. But the trouble is with a lot of libraries is that they're not yet fully catalogued,
mm,
because libraries like the Vatican Library, it hasn't got an online catalog, so that you don't know what's in it.
mm.
So with the royal family, there are some catalogs online, and you can find some things, but they've got so much that hasn't been catalogued, and you just haven't got a clue what there is in there. And the trouble is,
Wow.
nobody knows what's in there. This is the problem, you know.
Well, this is so interesting too when you think about these historical books, like maybe have been gifts from people
Yeah,
back in the day. And
yeah, yeah,
I interviewed a journalist from England recently, and he wrote about the seed bank that was in, I'm going to get it wrong, in Leningrad. It was the botanists had been going out and collecting all these seeds.
yeah,
And then it was World War II, and they got stuck. And basically, the only way they could survive was either they're going to eat the seeds, but some botanist died so that the seeds would be saved, because there were seeds to help. They were trying to find the best seeds to feed people, basically.
yeah, yeah.
And they were protecting these seeds. And this was all during a war, and they were surrounded in this seed bank. I mean, that's a form of a library too,
Yeah,
you
I mean,
know?
a library we automatically think of as books, but a library can be anything. A library is a collection of something.
Mm,
And you're talking about seeds. Funnily enough, my son-in-law's father is a farmer,
mm-hmm.
and he has been doing exactly what you've said with old breeds of
Oh yeah,
cereal.
the heritage. Yeah.
And he makes sure that some of these cereals are kept going. So every
Mm,
year he plants, say, a dozen different types of cereal, and then he harvests them, just literally, by hand, and then he keeps the seeds. And then in 10 years' time, he will grow them ones again and harvest them so the seeds just keep
Mm,
alive. But there is a seed library in England. I think
mm,
it's in Wales, somewhere in one of the mountains. So that's completely out of the way. But there is definitely a seed library with old plants, you know,
mm.
old seeds, so that if anything did happen, at least we've got something to start with again. Because
Yeah.
this is what we need. We need the information in case something happens. And like I wrote in my article, about if 99% of the world's population were decimated, the most valuable things in the world are books
Hmm.
because a computer is no good, you
Hmm.
know, uh, you
What
know,
if we have a Y2K, like a
well,
real one happens?
exactly. And I've always said, well, not always, obviously, because computers haven't been here, but, for the last decade or so, I've been saying that there doesn't need to be a World War III because all someone needs to do is turn off the cloud
Hmm.
and we're all screwed
Yeah.
up. We've
Y-
got no access to anything, you know, and that goes the same as, if, say, for instance, there is a massive outbreak of COVID or whatever, we won't have computers to back us up. We won't have cars. We won't have, anything electric because electric is not being generated. So
hmm.
therefore, we're going to need books to tell
Mm.
us how to start again.
Yeah,
It's
I
once you
agree. I
start to think about it, it's quite scary.
Well, and like you also bring up, and Nancy and I were just talking about this too, with what you brought up, and that is a thing during wars, people burn your cultural history. Look at what
Yeah,
happened with the Taliban when they started taking down all the
exactly.
statues and
Same thing.
the monasteries and things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Tell this sign of history. We have a lot of interesting things going on in this country. We have banned books. I mean, people
yeah,
were burning books if they didn't like what was in them
yeah,
politically, or um, if it had sexual things in it, or whatever it
yeah,
had. And
yeah.
then some books they want to change because of what was written wasn't like maybe that polite, or like Uncle Tom's
Right.
Cabin, they're trying to change that. And that's a classic book, whether you like it or not, what was in there to it's a very you've got to keep the originals
Of course you
because
have.
it tells the time of history, whether you
Yeah,
like it or not. You know what
yeah.
I mean?
We can change today, but we can't change yesterday. And I think
Mm,
that is something that we need, not we, because I think we're both of the same idea. But I mean, we as a world need to realize that
mhm,
just because it's written down 50 years ago, it doesn't mean to say that's what we're going to have to be like
mhm,
today. But we need
mhm.
to acknowledge that this happened 50 years ago, or
Right.
we've got the danger of going back to it because we always know history repeats itself. And it
Mhm.
does. So we need to be
Oh,
aware. We need to be very, very aware that although we don't like what we're reading, we need to be aware of it because it could come back and bite us on the bum. And
I
that is
don't want to.
happening.
Nothing's gonna bite me on the butt. Mosquitoes like my butt, but anyway. No. But going to libraries, I know that there's some beautiful ones in our country here that are
Mm,
treasured that
yeah,
people go to because it's ornate. The buildings are ornate. The books are
yeah,
just like wow. And also, you've got to think people used to go to libraries for a quiet place to write. A lot of writers went
yes,
there to write and do their
yeah,
research. So a lot of times you'll be going in a library, it will be to be like walking in the footprints of William Shakespeare, for example, right?
yeah.
So, do you find that happening with your visitors that come over to England with Norfolk tours? Does anybody want to go to one of the historic libraries, or do they see them maybe in a castle? Because all the castles have libraries, don't they?
Oh, yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, whenever we go to a stately home, they've got libraries like the ones behind us.
Mm,
They've all got these massive libraries. But
mm,
most of my most of my guests are interested in, their own connections, and luckily most of the um, information that they need is either online or on documents. So we're more likely to go to a record office, which I have taken people to record offices, which hold original documents,
Mm-hmm.
original deeds and original
Mm-hmm.
wills and things. So the printed books, a lot of them are actually online now. You can go to several websites where
Mm-hmm.
the actual books are already online. But the reason that a lot of these big stately homes had books is because books were a status symbol.
Oh,
If you
okay.
had a book, you obviously were telling the world that you could read, which
Mm.
was already a status symbol. So you've already got one tick in your box, because you could actually read. Another thing is if you've got a really expensively bound book, then obviously you're even another tick. But if you've got a whole volume of Shakespeare, then you must be a really learned person, and you must have a lot of money because that volume of Shakespeare
Mm-hmm.
costs a lot of money. So if you've
Yeah.
got shelves of books like we've got behind us, even somebody walking into that room 200 years ago would have known they were walking into a room belonging to a very, very rich person because
Mm.
they've got lots of books. My
Same
ancestors,
as.
my ancestors never had books 100 years ago. Well, 100 years ago they would. 150 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
my ancestors wouldn't have had any books. They might have had the Bible if they could read, but that would be the only book they would have. They wouldn't have books.
Mm. Yeah, the Bible was always, that was the, if you were lucky to have one at home. I
Mm,
was going to say the people with the cabinets of curiosities, that was also, you had to be well,
yeah,
anything that was educational, you had to be rich for, which is what we
exactly.
forget about too, is that different people and different cultures around the world and across this country too, they
Yeah,
weren't allowed to read and write. And
mm,
if you look at our slave history in America,
yep.
they were holding education away from people, you
And
know, and
that's all about control, and it is
mhm,
all about keeping the people down where they belong. And I'm,
yeah.
I'm not saying that's where they
And no,
belong.
you don't
That,
agree with that. Yeah, that's what
no,
the
but that's
the
what it is
power mongers believe,
because
and that they want to control.
we all know that if we educate people, they are going to get themselves out of the gutter. Well, if
Yeah.
you want to keep people in the gutter, don't educate them. And
Yeah.
that's why education in England didn't start until the
Hmm.
the middle of the 19th century.
Wow.
It weren't normal for people to go to school. That's why
Wow.
my ancestors couldn't read and write because
Yeah.
they wanted to be kept under the thumb of the people in charge. So,
Well,
I
in
mean,
this country, even now, like in the 40s with the sharecroppers, the
yeah,
parents and the kids, and this goes for black and white, the sharecroppers, they were going to a one-room schoolhouse maybe once a week, and the whole family was learning together if they were lucky.
yes, yeah. I mean, it's all about keeping people in their place. I mean, there's a fantastic sketch with three English comedians, Ronnie Barker, Ronnie Corbett, and John Cleese, which really explains the system. The laboring man, the middle class man, and then the upper class man, and it really, really does show that the poor man down in the laboring classes had no chance to get up to where he wanted to
Hmm.
possibly get to because it just wasn't available. I mean, my two children are the first in my family ever to go to university. It's
Wow.
only this generation that have been to university. And
Wow.
that's
That's
because poor people didn't go to university.
mm.
You know, my
So,
dad
yeah, yeah,
My
that's
dad
true.
went. My dad, when he was I don't know, 11 or 12, he passed what was called I can't remember what it's called now, to go to grammar school. But he only went there till he was 14 or 15 because his parents couldn't afford him to carry on at school. He had to go to work because they didn't
Mm.
have enough money. So my dad, although he actually a scholarship, that's what he passed. He passed the scholarship to go to grammar school, but because my grandparents didn't have enough money to keep him at grammar school, when he got past the school leaving age, he had to go to work.
Yeah.
So
That's a lot that we had that in South Africa where people could, if you needed to, you could leave before you graduated.
yeah, I mean, poor people didn't get a full education. It's simple.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it's a privilege, it became a privilege, and then you get to the society where it's a norm, and now people are fighting over where their kids go to school and
Yeah.
doing. I mean, we had some good scandals going over in this country with
Oh, we
universities and
yeah,
famous
we
people
do.
doing all
Yeah.
kinds of briberies and stuff. But the library system, that was one of those ways where someone could go in no matter what, and be able to educate themselves through books,
Yeah.
even through film, through music.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I
That's-
mean, there are photograph libraries, there are libraries of newspapers, there are libraries of magazines, there are libraries of music, there are
mhm.
libraries of, when I say music, I mean written down music. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
there's libraries for everything. And
Mm,
as soon as people could read and write themselves, then they could take themselves further up the ladder because then they could actually go out and do something themselves, whereas
mm,
before it wasn't accessible. And it is
mm,
thanks to people like Andrew Carnegie. He was a great person to bring libraries. I mean,
mhm.
he built libraries in the UK. Um,
Oh, I didn't know he did that there.
oh yeah,
Mm,
He built King's Lynn Library, not personally, but he paid for King's Lynn Library, which I've used a
I
lot.
didn't know. Well,
Yeah,
there's an English connection again. There we are.
yes, yeah. It's actually called it's called the Carnegie Library because he
Oh,
paid for it. Yeah, I mean,
wow.
and there's some nice picture. I think he opened it in 1906.
Mm,
I've got some photos of him opening King's Lynn Library. So yeah,
mm,
I mean, when people could start to get books, they could then educate themselves,
mhm.
and the world
I
could
also like
also.
the history of print. So,
Mm,
because maybe because the magazine thing, but I started in South Africa collecting old books. I had books from the 1800s, and I was just like, this is the coolest thing, because
yeah.
there's an art to these books.
Oh
The way
yes.
the printing was done. I mean, sometimes the book cover had like a little embellishment in it. There was texture to the paper. And now when you get a hardcover book or you get a paperback, it's not the same. And it's like I'm
No.
like that about vinyl, music
Yes.
being on vinyl,
Well, I
you
mean,
know.
like I was saying, it is all about when you walk into a library like the one behind us, the smell. Now, I'll just get a book from my shelf. Hold on. Don't go away.
Look at that library, everybody. Glynn's got quite a la-di-da library. My gosh.
Yeah. Uh,
That's
Here's
you're rather posh, Glynn. Oh, okay.
here's one of my, oh, there you go. Can you see it? One of my
Yeah,
books,
yeah.
and it's got a lovely,
Yes.
it's Bloomfield's
Oh,
History of Norfolk, and
oh.
it's got it's a lovely book, you've
And
got.
sometimes they have gold on them too, gold
Oh
leaf.
yeah, but you've got lovely pages there. Look at that. It's
Oh,
a
that's a real
proper.
history book.
Yeah, this was
Yeah.
printed. I think this one is about 1804. Let
Wow.
me.
So history books from the
No,
1800s.
sorry, 1806.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
oh,
Well,
I can't get it.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, it's the same too as when you look at old atlases, right? Isn't that
yeah,
a trip? Because then you can see the history of
exactly.
name changes, ownership
Oh
changes
yes.
of countries,
Yeah,
you know?
countries change names all the time. But the fantastic look of an old book like I've got here,
Mhm.
you can feel it, you can smell it.
Mm.
You know, this is all leather, and gold tooling here, and it smells like an old book,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
and that's what you get when you go to a library. You
And
know,
that's
you
a treasured possession,
oh
when
yeah,
you have something like that.
well,
When in Natchitoches, Louisiana, we went to the genealogical library, and it was run by
right,
the university.
yep,
And Cami Henry, the author, talk about women authors, she kept this collection. She made these massive scrapbooks throughout the years,
yeah,
and it was pulling all the headlines and stories from the newspaper that she thought was funny or interesting. And it really, she was cataloging the history of Natchitoches. I mean, it's the oldest
Right.
settlement, and these books are massive
Yeah.
and thick. And so when we were there, they were gracious. They were gracious to bring it out. Some of them, and we're not allowed to touch. You have to have gloves and all of this because of the paper. And she had a sense of humor. Oh my gosh! And just to see what she collected, and
Mm.
to see some of the headlines from back then, I mean, it really gave you a sense of that city at that in that era, which I think that's a beauty of going, because they have newspapers too, right? For genealogy.
Well, I mean, newspapers are full of fantastic information because the thing with a newspaper is it was written on
Hmm.
the day or the next day of an event. So you've got real time history. All right, we all know what newspapers are like. They are full of rubbish sometimes, but if it's a general story, you get a real feel of what the world was like on that day.
Yeah.
I mean, and especially if you're reading court cases or things like that, you get a you even get it word for word because very often the reporters would be sitting in court writing down what people were
Hmm.
saying. I mean,
Hmm.
I've got the court cases of my ancestors in 1882 when they were done for manslaughter, and I've got all of the court records, and thanks to the newspapers, so I know what happened in court. So
Wow.
that sort of stuff you could not buy. It's not available apart from in a newspaper.
Yeah, and that
So
was saved because of libraries and museums.
exactly, it was saved
Don't you
because
want to open that cabinet? I can't stand it. This cabinet in the picture behind us. I want to open it up. I want to know what's inside the cabinet.
well,
Don't you want to open it? It's a cabinet of curiosity.
you see, these stately homes have got so many nooks and crannies that I mean, when I went, I've actually been to this house. This is the house that actually you can rent this entire Georgian mansion if you want to. This is the one that has got
Wow.
12 bedrooms, and you can rent the entire place if you want to and live like a lord. But yeah, when we
I'll
went,
be in the I'll be in the library. I
no,
will.
I'll be in the kitchen. That's where I belong. But when we went there, I just wanted to take all the books off the shelves and have a look. You
Yeah,
know,
that's what I meant. I want to be in there.
yeah,
I would be hanging in there the whole time if I rented that.
exactly.
I'd be, yeah,
It's a
amazing.
beautiful place. But libraries are, you can just get in a library forever. I mean,
Oh,
one
we
of the
gotta
one really
go
big
ahead.
libraries at Blickling Hall, which is a fantastic library. Um, we were there once and they were cataloging it. And one of the books they were cataloging, difficult word, was about animals. And I think it was written in the 16th century, this particular book. And there were drawings of the animals. I mean, the drawings of a giraffe looked really peculiar, but I suppose the person who drew it had never seen one, that
Mm.
sort of thing. But on the pages, alongside a lion and a giraffe and an alligator, there were a mermaid and a unicorn, because as far as they were concerned, mermaids and unicorns were animals the same as alligators and giraffes. So,
You
who
never
knows?
know.
Who knows?
What about dragons?
We didn't look at that page, but I know we did see unicorns and we saw whatever else I've just said.
What about Nessie?
No,
The
well,
Loch Ness.
yeah, I mean the Loch Ness monster. I mean it's just something that you've got to try and see, haven't you?
Yeah, you have to. You can't not try. You can't help but look. See, that's another curiosity. I love the word curiosities.
Yeah, it's a
You
lovely
know,
word.
that is a good word. I love this. Well, Glenn, I want to go to the library now, don't you? It's, you know,
I spend hours in libraries, hours
mm,
and hours.
mm, I love it. Yeah, there's so many. And, it's just, it's, I want to say that they are part of tourism and they're part of quality of life. They're
Yes.
part of both, for travelers going to go look at who wrote what, who's, especially libraries in towns that had, authors that were well known. Like you've got
Yeah,
great authors in your backyard, so
yes, of
that
course.
library was connected to them in some way.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of authors will have actually paid for libraries within universities and things like that. Like Darwin, there's
Oh,
there's a Darwin College, and that
ooh,
library has obviously got a load of books all about evolution, animals, plants, and things like that.
cool. I want to go
So
there.
there are loads of libraries that specialize in an author, a scientist,
Mm,
whoever, whatever you want, you will
mm.
find a library about it somewhere.
Do
It's
you think
amazing.
kids know how the Dewey system works?
I don't know anymore because all they do is they go blip, 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 and the information is there, whether that's
Right on
right
their
or
phone.
wrong, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the Dewey Decimal System is worldwide, and you can find any subject using the same system. So you know where it's going to be. If you know a library, you know where it's going to be, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I can spend, well, I do spend days in libraries because
Yeah. I
it's
found
full.
some, you find authors you didn't know about. And oh, I love when they have a good library sale. That's the best when you get all those old books. Yeah, I was really I was dangerous. And libraries when they're having sales, I don't care because I love like old books that have botanical illustrations.
Oh, yes.
Oh man. And just
Yes.
like Sibley's Guide for Birds and things like those kinds of things. And it's
Yeah.
just like this, I love photography and everything, but when you had those illustrations,
Yeah.
it did it.
So many of them were watercolors or, you know, just works of art, weren't they? That
Mm-hmm.
that is the thing that, they were actually, they as there was no photography, they had to be drawn by an artist. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so so they the plates within books are really amazing, some of them. But
I
that is the
mhm.
problem with a lot of books where they get sold and then ripped apart for the plates. So you will find
Oh,
people will buy old books just for the illustrations. They will rip the illustrations out of the book, chuck the book away, and then sell the illustrations because they're the things that are actually valuable. But
that happens to CDs. People will take the CDs out, put them in a sleeve and a thing, and then there goes the CD case and all the notes and all the good stuff,
yeah,
you know. So that's really too bad. Well, now people can scan photos, right? And do some, yeah, that don't destroy books. That's a no-no.
no,
And
I've
don't
never,
ban books.
I've never turned a corner over in a book, and I've never written, notes in a book because
Oh,
I
I
was
have.
always I was always told not to. So
I got in trouble for that too. If you fall asleep with the book and the book is like split, you know what I mean? And, mom didn't mind if you're falling asleep with a book and that you're reading, but you need to take care of a book is like a living thing in our
yeah,
world. A book is a living and it's a piece of art. And that's what I'm saying to me. I'm fascinated about the art of books, of
yes.
bookery, if there's such a word. But to me, that is, so this is such a cool conversation about libraries. Let's go to them, let's save them. And I think when they do events and
Mm,
things like that, that really helps people get to libraries and start to remember just how important they are for everyone. I've discovered great authors. Some of my favorite bands came out of like obscure bands just because their music was in there,
hmm.
and so important. So everyone, the link for Glynn's article is in the episode notes, so check it out. And also go to blendradioandtv.com. But most importantly, go to norfolk-tours.co.uk and go to England. We want to
And
go see you.
go to your local library.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you need to
Absolutely.
do. Because if you keep up using your own local library, it will
Mm-hmm.
stay open. If you don't use it, you'll lose it, as they say.
It's just like your vote. Uh-oh. Well, thank you so much, Glynn. Always fun.
Thanks. See you later.
Thank you for joining us for Big Blend Radio's English Connection show with Glynn Burrows, owner of Norfolk Tours. If you're planning a vacation to England or looking up your family history in England, visit norfolk-tours.co.uk to connect with Glynn. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.